hand corner. Mary, if you just want to give a quick introduction of yourself, who you are, what you do, and we'll kind of go down the line. And then I've got some icebreaker questions for everyone.
Great. Thanks, Amanda, for having me here today. I'm an end-of-life doula, elder care specialist, and an end-of-life specialist. So I serve people and their families with advanced illness and end-of-life issues. I'm an adjunct to hospice. I don't replace them, but I'm an objective, empowering presence, offering advocacy, companionship, practical support, and services to families who need extra help.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for being a new partner, Mary. All right, Miss Heid Brown, good morning. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely.
My name's Heid Brown, and I'm an attorney with Osterhout McKinney. We're an elder law firm, and you may wonder what is exactly elder law, but basically it encompasses estate planning, power of attorney documents, advanced directive documents. It also includes probate and other matters of handling somebody's estate. We also do trust administration, and we also do guardianships for people who need them. And also, finally, we do Medicaid and VA planning.
Perfect. Thank you, Heidi, and welcome. We appreciate you being here. All right, good morning, Rachel. I want to see if I can say it. This is always a running joke. Harvey Engelhardt Funeral and Cremation Services.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, we get Englewood, Engelstein, all kinds of names, but yeah, I'm Rachel Hauck. I'm a licensed funeral director with Harvey Engelhardt. And we've been here operating in Fort Myers since the early 1900s and continue to be here. I'm honored to be here joining all of you in one capacity or another. We typically have relationships and work with hospice and elder law, all those different capacities. So very glad to be part of this discussion. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rachel. And last but certainly not least, Miss Deb Angela. Go ahead. Correct me. Get it right.
Oh, Angelicio, you are so
Angelicia.
There you go. Oh, Amanda. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to come here today, and good morning to everyone. And it's my pleasure. I work for Hope Healthcare, and most people know us as Hope Hospice. However, we have a very large continuum of care, and we offer many wonderful services to all of our lovely community to help them during difficult times. So my job is to educate our healthcare providers in the community. And again, thank you very much for having me here today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Deb. And obviously we're here to not only honor National Hospice Month, but also just talk about that uncomfortable conversation and how to breach that. So today is just an overview of end-of-life planning in general. I think the best strategic way to do this is to start in kind of chronological order. So Heidi, there are so many things that folks can do as they start planning for end of life. Do you want to kind of go over the basics?
Sure. When somebody is at an end of life situation, they need to make sure that their estate planning documents are in order. And by that, I mean they should make sure they have a will, a power of attorney document, advanced directive documents such as healthcare power of attorney or healthcare surrogate, perhaps a living will. And if the situation merits, perhaps they should also think about setting up a trust. And those types of documents really should be set up earlier as opposed to later, because unfortunately, as the patient gets closer to the final moment of life, their competency or their capacity to sign these documents may no longer be there. And if they're no longer competent, they can't sign these documents. And if they do not have these documents, what can happen is, for example, if you pass away without a will it's possible that your assets may be distributed in a different way than what you would have wanted. If you are no longer capable of managing your finances, and you do not sign a power of attorney for financial management ahead of time, then your family or your loved ones may need to file for a guardianship, and that can be time consuming. It can take a couple of extra months and also very, very expensive. Also, if you do not have your advance directives in place ahead of time, when the moment comes and you're no longer responsive, your family and loved ones may be wondering, well, what would the patient have wanted?
Right, right. Now you said something that's interesting, and I just want to trail on it. When you said when the situation warrants a trust may be appropriate, kind of give us an example of what situation would warrant a trust.
Okay. Trusts are just a way to hold assets or perhaps income or property, or and it can also provide a way of managing these assets. So there is a misconception that you have to be a multimillionaire in order to have a trust. Now, there are, of course, multimillionaires who have trusts for tax planning reasons, but sometimes that people who are not multimillionaires have to set up a trust. Let's say we have a spouse who is on hospice and he has a lot of assets, and this is the husband, and his spouse, the wife, already has a long-term illness and cannot manage assets anymore. We obviously would not want, when he passes away, the assets to pass directly to her, because she may not be able to fully manage them. She may not be able to pay her bills, etc. And if that's the case, it may make sense to go up and go ahead and set up a trust. Someone else would be trustee, and they would be in charge of managing the assets. Now, the surviving spouse may still be a beneficiary and be able to receive money from the trust or use the assets, but someone else is acting to manage the assets. Or another situation might be, let's say, I'm at the end of my life and I have an adult child who has disabilities, who is unable to manage their own affairs. I may say that I want my assets to go to a special needs trust for that child, so that that child can still remain on any type of government benefits that they were already on, and so that there is somebody else who's actually managing those assets. So those are just a couple of times when we might suggest a trust.
Okay, perfect. And another misconception, I think a lot of people, when they're caring for a loved one or they are the manager of, their affairs, the power of attorney actually passes away with the person that passes. So what type of documentation do you recommend someone has to be able to take care of those minor details that happen after someone passes away?
So you're correct. The power of attorney document terminates when the principal or the patient passes away. And that's when it would be the personal representative of your will, or some states call this an executor. That would be the person who then steps in and would take over different affairs. That would be the person who would be responsible for, let's say, calling Social Security to let them know you've passed, even though the funeral home has probably already done it. There may be still a good reason to do so. Or this would also be the person who would end up canceling your credit cards and contacting the bank that you've passed, and also contacting, let's say you have a pension, contacting that pension company. So it would actually be your personal representative that would take over. Now, if you already had a trust in place before you passed away, the successor trustee of that trust can, of course, access any kind of assets or bank accounts that are in the trust. They may need a death certificate.
Sure.
So if there is some delay in getting a death certificate, then sometimes there can be a delay in being able to access those funds.
Yeah. It's a common misconception that people think, oh, I'm power of attorney, I can do all of this. It's not that simple. And I think, Rachel, you probably run into that a lot when people are coming in to make final arrangements, and they probably bring that power of attorney paperwork in and they think they're good to go, and it just doesn't work that way, right?
We do, yes. I did want to touch on that issue because by and large, most people think that the power of attorney extends after death. So we do try to get that message out there. But one of the biggest issues that we run into has to do with the actual authorization of disposition for a loved one. So while the executor can carry on with the will and take care of the financial aspects and the assets, the actual disposition of the loved one, that still reverts back to the next of kin. So in a situation where the executor is not the next of kin, for example, say someone has had a loving companion for 20 years who's not actually married, the authorization for disposition would still go back to the children or nieces, nephews, whatever you may have. And that sometimes creates a situation. So in setting up a will, if we are able to see a will that actually states, I wish to be cremated and have my cremated remains scattered in the Gulf, or I wish to be buried in such and such cemetery, and I wish for this specific person, John Smith, to be in charge of that, that allows us to go forward. Even if that person isn't a blood relative or a legal next of kin, we can go forward based on those instructions. So that's very helpful.
Yeah, no, that's great information. And again, I think it's just so interesting because people don't realize this. It's such an uncomfortable conversation to even talk about it. So they think like that they'll have no problem going in and making these arrangements. And it's just really not that simple. So a couple things that I want to talk to you about, being proactive about your final arrangements can lead to less stress for your family the day of. It can make your wishes very clear, but talk to me about having that uncomfortable conversation and some advice that you would give, and also just touch on the cost of things. Pre-planning can be very proactive for your family, for funds reasons as well.
Absolutely. And it is a subject that nobody wants to discuss, and it can be very awkward. This is why we encourage people to actually do it before anyone becomes ill or is really facing an imminent type of situation, because then it's even more awkward. So if you're talking about this with your parents or your children, in your earlier years when you're kind of getting all the rest of your life in order, that's one less thing that you have to deal with in a more highly emotional state. So we encourage people to have these meetings and talk about pre-arrangements as a family, because that way it eliminates any question among family members of what really was discussed. In circumstances where you have 6 kids, all 6 kids may have had an individual conversation with their parents where they interpreted the instructions to be this or that. And then the other person says, well, I interpreted that as meaning something totally different. But when it's pre-planned and it's written down, it eliminates all of that uncertainty for the family. And we don't have to berate them with a million questions trying to figure out what was going to happen. We can have a date and a stamp on it that says, this is what Dad said that he wanted on this particular date. Cost-wise, it's very beneficial because the earlier that you set those things up, the sooner that you lock in the price of that time. So when pre-arrangements are made, typically whatever you pay on that day is a guaranteed price. So even if the cost has gone up significantly 15, 20 years or 10 years, whatever, the family's only charged what that original price was. the money is placed into either a trust or an insurance type of product, so that it's safe, it's guaranteed. If for some reason the funeral home goes out of business or something, the money is still there and available to be applied to any funeral home that is carrying out the arrangements that are prearranged. So it also protects that investment so that people don't have to be worried, well, I paid all this money to the funeral home and now they're gone.
Well, here's another preconceived notion that people have, and I think a lot of people hesitate to pre-plan because they're not sure where they're going to end up. Say if they're living in Florida, but they want their spouse was up north when he passed away, and they want to be buried next to their spouse. Talk to us about that that preconceived notion that you're not able to be transferred.
Well, we transfer people out of Florida all the time, probably because so many people that live in Florida come from other parts of the country. So it's a very, very common process. You can either have your arrangements where you have a viewing and a gathering here first and then go out of state and have another funeral for the family that's up there. Or we can make it very simple, and within a day or two of the passing of the death, we can coordinate a flight to send the loved one back wherever they have their funeral home up north that they work with. So we can be as simple or as advanced as they need. And it really is just a matter of getting the death certificate and the permitting, which we take care of for the family. And usually a flight can be made within a day or two. And expense wise, it's really not that much different than having a cremation, depending on if you're going for more elaborate details, like a more elaborate casket or something like that. But just the actual coordination of the shipment of a person up north is really not that much different than a cremation arrangement.
And those fees are probably comparable. You can't pay for that because you don't know what the fee is going to be to transport someone, right?
We actually can prepay for the bulk of it. The only kinds of things that would be variables that would change would be the type of fees that the funeral home is not in charge of. So that would be like the actual cost of the airline ticket, the actual cost of death certificates, obituaries, things like that that are controlled by a third party.
Sure.
But the actual cost of picking someone up from the place of death and preparing them with embalming and getting all the flight arrangements made and the permitting, that's all something that can be prepaid to the funeral home and make it much easier at the time.
Okay. Very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you. All right, Deb, talk to us about hospice. What is hospice and how is it paid for?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that a lot of people don't know, Amanda. And first, I wanted to say, excellent advice from our previous panelists on having that conversation. It's so important. So thank you for that. Hospice actually is one of those things that Medicare did right. Did that come out of my mouth? And for now, it's here with us. Here's the thing. I tell everybody when I talk, death and taxes are two certainties in life. It is. We're all going to die. We all may not need hospice, but it's one of those things that's there if and when we ever need it. Now, the Medicare hospice benefit is available to anyone. Well, I get this question a lot. Well, what if I'm not 65? It doesn't matter. We work with insurance companies. We work with Medicaid. But the biggest takeaway that I want everyone listening to remember is this. Even if you don't have insurance, it doesn't matter. We will never turn anyone away that needs hospice care. Hope typically does about $1.5 million in charity a year for patients that don't have any insurance. And so we are always there if you need it. But it is completely paid for. And if you do have Medicare or commercial insurance, you basically just sign over Medicare hospice benefit.
Another common misconception a lot of people ask, they don't ask, they just assume. So talk to me about the difference between hospice care and palliative care.
Absolutely. And that's another great question. Together, they are one and the same because palliative care is acute symptom management and comfort care. So, of course, that fits under the wonderful umbrella of hospice. However, palliative care on its own is not hospice, and it is acute symptom management. Hope has a palliative care program where we have nurse practitioners that will physically go out to the patient's home to help them with an advanced or serious illness. With those acute symptoms, and work not only with physical symptoms, but the psychosocial component of that. And I really have to say, on a side note, that our service area right here in Lee County specifically, we are very blessed that we have 2 palliative care programs. There are many, many areas in the United States that do not offer this at all. So Lee has a hospital-based palliative care program and an outpatient center, and our medical model is more home-based. So I feel that we are very, very fortunate here in Lee County to have that. But it is a nice program. So together, they are one and the same, but separately, they are not.
I love that. There's many descriptions that people have given where a hospice is more, you have that terminal illness, palliative care, you're still fighting for it. It's still a terminal illness, but it's not stopping. What's the word I'm looking for?
The curative treatment. And let me give you a quick example, Amanda. You could have someone that just started a new immunotherapy. They were diagnosed with cancer, and they're having terrible side effects.
Right.
And they're too tired or in too much pain or too weak to leave their home to physically go to receive their treatment. So a palliative care program, our nurse practitioners can go out to the home, we can do an evaluation, we can help with medications, and then we also give assessments to all of their specialists that they're seeing and primary care doctors. And so it's an extra layer of support.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're
All
welcome.
right. All right, Mary, we're going to bring you on, and I've got questions, another round of questions. Also just want to say to the audience out there, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll be happy to answer them. All right, Mary, good morning. How are you?
Morning. I'm excellent. Thank you.
Good. So tell me exactly what an end-of-life doula is.
Well, an end-of-life doula is, just like in birth, you've heard of a birth doula, or in birth and in death, we lose control and we need help. And in the same way, I accompany people at the end of life. So like everybody has brought up, it's a hard discussion. It's hard to have. When people are going through traumatic events, it's hard to make, decisions. So basically, I like to educate the community about hospice and palliative care. I'm so glad we talked about that today. Debunking the myths of hospice. Hospice is not giving up. It's taking control of what you have. I help create death plans, vigiling. I care and advocate for clients in their home and the hospital. I do legacy projects. Again, planning home vigil. I provide respite relief to families and basically spiritual and emotional support during a really difficult time. What we call families who need extra help. I'm sure Deb knows about that. So it's just something that I've done since 1999. I feel called to it, and I'm happy to serve people and at the end of life.
And you have a very personal mission to lead you to this career. I do want to tell people your story. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, in 1999, I was like 30 years old, and I lost one of my dearest friends to cancer. And that's when I recognized there was a disconnect. And throughout that time, I kept finding myself at the end of life with people and knowing what to do. Don't ask me how, but it just occurred. And so I really started to see the disconnect, and I wanted to bridge that gap. And so I felt like I was a little bit of a social worker, but not really, a little bit of a CNA, but not really. So when I heard the word doula, that's when the light bulb went off, and I went, oh, this is how I can help serve people at the end of life. So it's just an honor and a privilege to serve people at the end of life. And if they allow me into that sacred space and they feel safe, again, it's an honor. People say, oh, did you go home and cry? And most of the time I'm jumping for joy, right? Because that person had this beautiful passing, or I heard the word chaplain, right? We got the chaplain there and it happened. So, more than anything, like Deb said, we're all going to die, but we do have control on how we want that to go. just like Heidi said, doing your advanced care planning. So I'm also involved in a new project called Mideo, and it's my informed decision on video. And I think this is going to be a game changer for all of us.
Yeah, I agree with that, and we'll get into a little bit more. I want you to talk about what that is,
Okay.
but we're going to do another round. Again, if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat box. Heidi, I want to bring you back up and talk about assets. We're talking about end-of-life planning, so let's talk about how to protect your assets after you pass away.
So oftentimes I'm asked, well, is there any way that I can try to avoid probate? And for those of you who don't know, probate is just basically a court proceeding, and it deals with the distribution of somebody's assets after they have passed away. And a lot of why people like to avoid it is because it can take up to a year in some cases, and it can be expensive to go through. So what I like to tell people is the first thing you have to do is look at how an asset is titled to know whether it would need to go through probate. So basically, if you have an asset that only has one owner and has no beneficiaries, then it will need to go through probate when that person passes away. So as an example, let's say I have a vacant lot and it's just in my name, Heidi M. Brown, and no one else. Then if I pass away, it needs to go through probate. But let's say, for example, I own a house with my mother. So it's Heidi Brown and Martha Brown as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Then if I pass away, the house would be owned by my mother and it wouldn't need to go through probate. Also, let's say I have life insurance. It pays to, let's say, my father as beneficiary when I pass away. Then that type of an asset, because it has a beneficiary, will not need to go through probate. So a lot of times, for example, if we have a married couple, we may see that most of their assets are jointly titled, which makes sense. And chances are when the first spouse passes away, we may not need to file for probate. But when that second spouse passes away, we may need to. And there's then a couple of ways to avoid probate. If it's a simple situation where you only have a couple of beneficiaries, then and you want them to inherit equally, you might be able to avoid probate by adding those beneficiaries to the asset as beneficiaries. But if you have a more complicated estate where you want to give specific dollar amounts to certain people, let's say your nieces and nephews, and then you want to give certain dollar amounts to different charities, if you do want to avoid probate with that type of scenario, then you're most likely going to have to use some type of a trust to do so.
Very interesting. That's really close to what's happening in my family dynamic, because I'm always curious about the different kinds of trusts that are out there, because I think all of us can shake our heads and say that this can get very confusing, right? For sure. So another thing that I think is really important to talk about is how an attorney getting involved can either help or hurt the family dynamics after someone passes if they don't pre-plan. So talk to me about some of the, maybe even give a story if you'd like, of a situation that got messy and why pre-planning can be so, so important.
So for example, let's say that you want to give more money or more of your assets to one kid versus another kid. In other words, you don't want to do it equally. So in that type of a scenario, you would have to do pre-planning. Because if you die without a will and you don't have beneficiaries or joint account holders, then what will happen is the Florida statutes will say who will inherit. And in that case, it would go to both of the kids equally. But if you wanted it more to go to one kid for whatever reason, whether it is because maybe that one child helped you out more, or maybe you feel that the one child, perhaps they have a disability, and you feel that they need the money more than the other one, then in those cases, you really do need to plan ahead. Now, sometimes what can happen, even if you have a will and a trust and it's signed under the proper circumstances and there's no undue influence and everything is sort of tied up neatly with a bow, what can happen is after you pass away, sometimes your beneficiaries are not happy with the result. And, sometimes there's different schools of thoughts as to, how to lessen the chance that could happen. Some people think that writing a note is best. Some people think letting the beneficiaries know ahead of time that, hey, they're getting less and this is why is best. But I think it just really depends upon the circumstances. I do think that anytime you have a will or a trust, you do have to make sure that it is signed with the proper number of witnesses and a notary, because if you do not follow the formalities, it is a lot easier to get that will or trust kicked out of court
Sure.
after you've passed away.
Sure. And then that ends up being Rachel's problem, right?
Yeah, we've had a couple situations where we've had literally something penciled onto a notebook paper and signed and dated. And if no one's disputing it, well, that's fine. But if somebody says, well, I don't think that Aunt Margaret wrote that, that's not even her handwriting. Well, how can you prove it? There's no notary stamp. It wasn't officially filed. It wasn't officially done. So yeah, it can be very problematic in those situations.
I bet it can. I bet it can. Well, I know that we're in the days of little travel, but tell me, if I were a travel bug and I was in another country and passed away, Rachel, what are some of the precautions that you would recommend we have in place?
Well, if you pre-arrange your funeral services, it is much safer if you are traveling, even if it's just on a cruise. And people don't think about that, and I know the cruise industry is hurting terribly right now, but say you were just, going to the Virgin Islands or the Bahamas and something were to happen on the cruise ship. Well, if you are outside of the United States, basically your family would have to, and maybe there's a language barrier, but they would be in the situation where they would have to find a funeral home, go through all the red tape that's involved with, getting a person able to be sent from one country to another, which requires a lot of, contagious health papers verifying that they didn't pass from a contagious disease. It's a lot of permitting. In some cases, the death certificate has to be translated. So there's a whole lot of things that come into play when things are being done internationally. And if you pre-plan all of that ahead of time, that means that the funeral home that you set that up with, that becomes their issue to handle for you. So where they might call the family members and ask, well, we need a copy of the original passport, or we need this or that, to send to them. It's very helpful to have that established ahead of time. And in most cases, like in our situation, we have a special travel protection plan that you can actually purchase along with your pre-arrangements that will also guarantee that you won't have a lot of cost added. In other words, you pay the one-time fee for travel protection, and no matter where you are in the world, those expenses are covered. So it's almost like an insurance policy on top of the insurance policy to help, cover those expenses that might be unforeseen.
How expensive can that get, trying to get someone back from another country?
Well, it varies. It varies from country to country. So we have to do everything through the consulate, which would either be in Miami or in Washington. So depending on where the embassy is located and which consulate for which, whichever country we're dealing with, they all have different fees. So we call at the time that everything occurs and we kind of find out what's involved, what documents they need, what fees are associated with that, how much it actually costs to go through the consulate. And then of course the airline charges are different based upon, where you're flying to and from.
I hit the wrong button. Sorry.
Happens.
Perfect. We did actually have a question. Is there a fee for a will or trust consultation, Heidi?
Yes, our office does have a fee for an initial consult. It is $250, but the fee is then applied towards any legal work that we would engage in.
Okay, so if you're updating your will documentation and you want to come in for a consultation, that $250 will go towards the preparation of the documentation. Okay, fantastic. All right, hopefully that answered your question. If not, go ahead and shoot us another one. All right, Deb, I know that Hope Hospice is very prominent in the area, and most people do think of it as Hope Hospice, but you offer a variety of other services. Do you want to give us a rundown of those?
Absolutely. And you're right. So many people don't know, they associate Hope with just hospice. So over the years, Hope's umbrella has evolved into wonderful, wonderful programs to serve our community. We have an amazing Parkinson's program, and this is a non-medical program. However, we have over 300 patients enrolled in this program. And what they get, well, especially now with COVID, everything is virtual, but lots of educations, there's symposiums, there's Tai Chi classes, movement classes, nutrition classes. So it is an all-encompassing, wonderful program that can help not only the patient, but the caregiver too. We have an amazing bereavement support and caregiver support group. And I really want to emphasize, especially right now, sometimes having just a little extra help, if you lost a loved one, it may have been 10 years ago, especially around the holidays, can be really, really important. Our bereavement and caregiver support groups are open to anyone at no charge. You do not have to have been on our services to utilize them. So we do have some special groups coming up for the holidays, not caregiver support and also bereavement support, but we have very specialized bereavement support groups too for parents that lost a child, a mom's group, dad's group, Spanish speaking only, the LGBTQ. We also, one of my favorite ones we started last year, we have a pet support loss group. So yes, and it was very, very much needed. So anyone that's interested can just go to our website to get the dates and times. We do a lot for our vets. We have a volunteer honor guard, which is absolutely amazing. So we do recognition ceremonies for our wonderful vets, but we also are a participant in what's called the Veterans History Project. And the Library of Congress started a program a few years back. They want vet stories and they want to archive them in the Library of Congress so it will be available for future generations to see. So we are a facilitator for that. You can call Hope to get more information on all these projects. But again, that is something that we will facilitate. PACE, it's an all-inclusive program for the elderly, which is an amazing program that we have here. We serve Collier, Lee, and Charlotte County for that. We have a Hope Connections program in Glades and Hendry, which is also a state-run program that we're a facilitator to help low-income seniors. Let's see. We have a kids care program that encompasses such a wide range of wonderful services for children and adolescents in our area. We do a bereavement camp for children every year, which is amazing and wonderful. We have a pet program. So when someone comes on to hospice and our services and they have a pet that they can't care for while they're ill, we will help care for their pet. And one of the most important things, if they don't have anyone to care for their pet after they pass, we will adopt their pets out. So that's just such a relief for so many people. And in our palliative care program, which I talked about, and of course, hospice. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much it. Oh, in addition to all the ancillary services that we provide for our patients under hospice care, like music therapy, art therapy. We have end-of-life dualists too, yay. And we do Reiki. So there's a whole host of different things. So yeah, please contact us if you have any questions about any of the services.
Perfect. Thanks, Deb.
You're welcome.
All right, Mary. I want to just tell me a little bit about maybe a personal story that leads people into what it is that you do.
Gosh, it's funny because I didn't know, like I said earlier, I didn't know what I was doing. But it just most recently, I lost my mother 1.5 years ago. My parents passed 5 months apart. And I will say this, as much as I thought I knew everything, whoa, I got schooled, right? But I'm just super thankful that I was able to be with her and spend quality time with her. She was here in Naples with me, so we were with a vow, and she enjoyed massage therapy and music therapy. I got her down to the beach. I wheeled her up and down Gulf Shore Boulevard, up until her last couple days. But the biggest thing I think that I learned from this was I wasn't expecting my mom to have what we call terminal agitation. And I know that Deb is probably very aware of this. And I was able to hold my own with it, but it was just so thankful, even with all my experience, to have the hospice support. Again, I'm such a big supporter of hospice and really wanting to debunk the myths out there and just take control of what we can. So now I'm just excited about helping everybody else get through this process.
We're all going to go through. So, well, I'd like to conclude by does any other panelist have a question for another panelist? And I know we're getting a couple questions in here. Gerald is asking, can the consultation with Mary's organization be done virtually?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Everything, I can do a lot of stuff virtually. Absolutely.
Okay. And the same question came in for Heidi. Heidi, are you willing to do your consultations for wills and trusts virtually as well, or do they have to come into the office?
Yes, we can do the consultation virtually. We can also do it by telephone, and with proper precautions, we can also do the consultation in person. But when it comes to signing wills, trusts, power of attorney documents, and the like, those still have to be done in person. So we do take precautions when that happens. Everybody is masked and is in a gigantic conference room and being several feet away from each other.
Perfect. Perfect. Any other questions? Rachel, I did actually have one more for you. This is a question that we get a lot. If a funeral home, if you make your arrangements with a funeral home and then you go out of business, what kind of guarantees do you have, like the risks that are associated with that?
Well, anytime that you prepay for funeral arrangements, that money, it has to be placed into some other type of capacity. So either insurance or a trust. So that means that if the funeral home goes out of business, the family is able to take that policy or that trust and they can take it to any other funeral home of their choice. If it's an affiliated funeral home with the one that moved or went out of business, then more than likely it's the same difference. They can treat it exactly the same. If it's a funeral home that's outside of an affiliation with the original one, they have the option of charging the family the difference. They don't necessarily have to go with the guaranteed price. However, that being said, almost all of them that I've ever worked with honor that policy. But the important thing is there's no, and I wish this wasn't the case, but unfortunately it is, there's no national database or statewide database that holds all of these things in a listing. So if the family loses their policy, or they don't have a printout of it, or they didn't ever, share it with anyone else.
That's the key. That's the key.
we have no way of finding it. And that's why we always say, even if you just want to get things written down, put it on file, just tell somebody, or, you know, put it with a funeral home and tell one of your family members where it is, or give them a copy, because if it's lost, then the money is there, but there's no documentation proving it.
It's crazy how many seniors go through this process. They listen to these topics and these series, and they go out and they do it, but they don't communicate it with their family.
Yeah.
And there's no way for the family to know.
Yeah. And I think, as we were talking about in the beginning, it's because it's such a taboo subject that nobody wants to bring up. But I think approaching it from the aspect of, look, kids, I'm not being morbid. I'm not rushing towards death, but I love you guys. And I want to make sure that not only that I'm having things the way I want, but that you guys, this is my gift to you, so that you don't have to struggle with it. So I think approaching it from more of that loving space is a little bit easier than saying, well, let's talk about death. And everybody's like, Mom, we don't want to talk about that.
I couldn't. Hey guys, I got my funeral arrangements done. Can you pass the gravy at Thanksgiving?
Yeah, right. Right.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So any closing remarks or questions for the other panelists before we wrap up? All right.
Thank you, everybody.